Well, as decided, we will take up from today Book 7, the Book of Yoga. And in this book, we have about 6 cantos, and is basically the yoga of Savitri, as distinguished from the yoga of Ashwapati, which we saw in Book 1, Canto 3, 4, 5. Of course, we all know Book 2 is also basically to do with the yoga of Ashwapati, but that is a great detail of the traveler of the worlds, which was discovered by Sri Aurobindo in his Ascent to the Supermind. But the genesis of this ascent was, as we have seen in Cantos 3, 4, 5 of Book 1, which we say is the vertical yoga or the yoga of ascent. And we distinguish that with that of Savitri, which is the horizontal yoga. It's not necessarily, we cannot call it descent, because the moment we say the word descent, it would be the descent into the inconscient. So here we can say it is the yoga as against the vertical, the horizontal. By horizontal, what we mean is going within. It's an inward journey towards the psychic being. And both these yogas together, the ascent and the inward going, the vertical and the horizontal, they together make the integral yoga. But we can begin with any one of these, either the vertical or the horizontal, and then after having gone to a sufficient distance, one can take up the other path which we have left behind. And so here is a very interesting book that we are going to take up. And as I told you, one of my last sentences in the last class was, this is something perhaps which will be closer to our understanding, because most of the synthesis of yoga and the letters of Sri Aurobindo and the mother to the disciples are concerned with this going within. We do have, of course, some letters referring to the ascent, but the mother's emphasis has been always to go towards the psychic being. In fact, I heard from some young persons who lived in those days very close to the mother, that she used to say only one advice. She used to speak of only one advice go into your psychic being, realize the psychic being, contact your psychic being by any method, every method. That is to be so often repeated that the children felt that there is nothing else but only the psychic being, and that's the only yoga to be done. And now we can understand very clearly why she emphasized on the psychic being. Because the yoga of Ashwapati is the yoga of Sri Aurobindo, and the yoga of Savitri has been typically the yoga of the mother. So, and mother being very close to the ashramites and those who went to her, spoke to her, played with her. And for children it is much easier to speak of the inner being than to speak of the intuitive being, intuitive level or the overmind and all that. So, and also this question of the descent into the inner being is a journey that's much more fulfilling in a way. Fulfilling in the sense it can permeate your daily life, whereas the ascent can have the danger, if I can use a strong word, of disconnecting you with life. Whereas this inward movement can connect you with life, can guide you in your daily life, could become, as we say, the governor of your daily existence. So I suppose the mother emphasized on this because we have to deal with problems and issues of daily life, and the best governor is not the mind or the heart, but the psychic being. So we have here 7 cantos, and of this, the first canto reads the joy of union, the ordeal of the foreknowledge of death, and the heart's grief. In my previous class, I did give you a bit of the background to this canto, and it is important to know what is this ordeal of the foreknowledge of death, and from the point of view of the story of Mahabharata, from where the story has been taken. This is the crux of the story of Mahabharata, that Savitri suffered most as a woman in any mythology because of the single thing that she had the foreknowledge of the death of Satyavama, her own husband. Having said that, I thought I will run through this canto, and that's what I will do with this book actually. I will not take up every canto and every line by line. Maybe some cantos I will go through more closely, line by line, but otherwise wherever is possible I will just take you through the canto. But today, before I take you through the first lines of this Canto 1, I would like you to turn to Book 6, Canto 1, if you can find that line. That's the page where it's difficult to say, because this Canto 1, if you have noted somewhere, where Savitri is giving her decision to her father, because I want you to understand the depth of this title and the depth of this canto. And we can do that only if we know a bit of the background. So all of us know the story that Savitri had gone out in search of her husband, and she finds Satyavan in the forests of Shalva woods. And then, having found him, she recognizes him to be the person who is meant for her, the person with whom she has come lives together, and therefore they decide to get married. And they even go through the ceremony of what we in India call the Gandharva marriage. That means exchange of garlands without any external religious ceremony. So there is an initial marriage that takes place between the two, unknown to the others, but that is only a step between them. There's got to be now a declaration of what she has chosen, whom she has chosen, etc. So she comes back to her father's palace, and at that time in the palace there is Narad. Well, I don't want to go into all the details of Narad, etc. But there's one line that I would like to read. It's difficult for you to trace it, but don't bother. It's from Book 6, Canto 1, page 473 by my 1954 edition. Who was this Narad? I mean, Sri Aurobindo captures in a few beautiful lines the character of Narad. He says, Narad, he sang of the glory and marvel still to be born, of the Godhead throwing off at last its veil, of bodies made divine and life made bliss, immortal sweetness clasping immortal might, heart sensing heart, thought looking straight at thought, and the delight when every barrier falls, and the transfiguration and the ecstasy. And as he sang, the demons wept with joy, foreseeing the end of their long, dreadful task, and the defeat for which they hoped in vain, and glad release from their self-chosen doom, and return into the one from whom they came. I picked out this passage because it really speaks of the new creation. The new creation that is envisioned by Sri Aurobindo and the mother. So Narad sings of such a beautiful world where Godhead throwing off at last its veil of bodies made divine and life made bliss. So there is a transformation of the physical, life itself becomes beautiful and blissful, etc. So it's a beautiful passage to say that Narad, his only motive is to sing and to welcome that beautiful new world. Now I come to the passage on 481, page 481 by my edition, where at last Savitri announces to her parents. Now what does she announce? And here you see very distinct, clear cut, no hesitation. There is, you can see a kind of a decision that does not come from emotion or from the mind. It is definitely a deeper verdict. So she says, Father and King, I have carried out thy will. One whom I sought, I found in distant lands. I have obeyed my heart. I have heard its call. On the borders of a dreaming wilderness, mid Shalva's giant hills and brooding woods, in his thatched hermitage, Dhimatsena dwells. blind, exiled, outcast, once a mighty king. The son of Dhimatsena, Satyavan, I have met on the wild forest's lonely verge. My father, I have chosen. This is done. You see, really, almost there is no emotion in that. There is no sentimentality. There is no question of, I have fallen in love. It's a decision. It is a kind of a choice. So the verdict is straight. You can almost hear the clarity with which she has spoken, the strength that is there behind her words. And she says very plain, almost, there is, it's too prosaic even. So she says, my father, I have chosen. This is done. There's kind of no discussion. I'm not asking you for your advice or your approval. I have chosen and it's over. So, it is kind of a decree. The decree of the destiny is like you see the voice of fate saying, thou shalt do this, and it's done. So you see there are two sentences in this single line. My father I have chosen, full stop. This is done, full stop. The full stop in the sense is over. No discussions. So it is that kind of a verdict she gives. And then, of course, what follows is a discussion. The parents give their opinion. The opinion of the father is, of course, very clear because he knows who Savitri is and that her decisions cannot be wrong. So he gives his consent and his approval. But then the mother, being the mother, she asks for the advice of Narad. And she says, O Narad Rishi, Muni, what is your opinion about this choice? And before giving his opinion, here is a description of Satyavan given by Narad, because it's customary, of course, when of course this is the system in our arranged marriages. It may be not there in our love marriages anymore. But in arranged marriages, of course, it's customary that the parents know who is the boy, what is his family, what does he do, how much does he earn, what is his income, and all the mundane questions. It's kind of to say, before we give our girl in marriage, we like to know about the boy. So this knowing about the boy, who is Satyavan, is given by Narad himself. So it's an extraordinary description, and for the first time we come to know the real outer and the inner personality of Narad. So it's about a page and a half, but I'd like to read it out not only because it's an extraordinary description, but later when you see the joy of union between Savitri and Satyavan, you come to know whom is Savitri loving. Is it just an ordinary common human being that she has fallen in love? So why is Savitri, or why has Savitri chosen him? So who is that he? Because unless and until we know the total personality of Satyavan, we will not be able to appreciate the union between Savitri and Satyavan. So it's only when you know the depth of Satyavan that you would know the depth of their love. And so here is the passage which I hope some of you have been able to trace it out. Page 487. Can you give your page number if you have found, maybe for others? Pardon? That's from the truth thou hast claimed. Got it? Mine is 487. That's book 6, canto 1, 487, where Narad is giving his description. Got it, Shruti? The same canto, we just turned a few more pages where I saw last time, another 3, 4. The marvel of the meeting earth and heavens is he whom Savitri has chosen mid men. Where ultimately Narad gives his decree. Maybe you have underlined that sentence if you have read it through. Is a decree or is a description given by Narad of Satyavan. The line is, the truth thou hast claimed, I give to thee the truth. Anyone has found the line? Oh, you have my volume, so it's no 487. 429, page 429. Yeah, because it's a longish passage, I would like you to follow me. Yeah, so here is, for the first time we come to know who is Satyavan. Because the mother, she has asked him to say, asking Narad saying, to know is best, however hard to bear. So she says, tell me the full truth about Satyavan. So that's why with reference to that, Narad is telling, the truth thou hast claimed, I give to thee the truth. A marvel of the meeting earth and heavens is he whom Savitri has chosen mid men. His figure is the front of nature's march. His single being excels the works of time. A sapphire cutting from the sleep of heaven, delightful is the soul of Satyavan. A ray out of the rapturous infinite, a silence waking to a hymn of joy. A divinity and kingliness gird his brow. His eyes keep a memory from a world of bliss. As brilliant as a lonely moon in heaven, gentle like the sweet bud that spring desires, pure like a stream that kisses silent banks, he takes with bright surprise spirit and sense. A living knot of golden paradise, a blue immense he leans to the longing world, time's joy borrowed out of eternity, a star of splendor or a rose of bliss. In him soul and nature, equal presences, balance and fuse in a wide harmony. The happy in their bright ether have not hearts more sweet and true than this of mortal make, that takes all joy as the world's native gift, and to all gives joy as the world's natural right. His speech carries a light of inner truth and a large-eyed communion with a power in common things has made veilless his mind, a seer in earth shapes of garbless deity, a tranquil breath of sky windless and still, watching the world like a mind of unplumbed thought, a silent space musing and luminous, uncovered by the morning to delight, a green tangle of trees upon a happy hill, made into a murmuring nest by southern winds. These are his images and parallels, his skin in beauty and in depth, his peers. A will to climb lifts a delight to live, heaven's height companion of earth beauty's charm, an aspiration to the immortal's air, lain on the lap of mortal ecstasy. His sweetness and his joy attract all hearts to live with his own in a glad tenancy. His strength is like a tower built to reach heaven, a Godhead quarried from the stones of life. O loss, if death into its elements of which his gracious envelope was built, shattered this vase before it breathes its sweets, as if earth could not keep too long from heaven a treasure thus unique, loaned by the gods, a being so rare, of so divine a make, that till now is if you have understood, the extraordinary being called Satyavan. But then here comes the sad part. In one brief year, when this bright hour flies back and perches careless on a branch of time, this sovereign glory ends, heaven lent to earth, this splendor vanishes from the mortal sky. Heaven's greatness came, but was too great to stay. 12 swift-winged months are given to him and her. This day returning, Satyavan must die. So that is the verdict that comes from the mouth of Narad. And if you remember, this is exactly the line that we have at the end of Book 1, Canto 1. This was the day when Satyavan must die. So that's the verdict that Narad utters, because Narad can see the future. So he sees that this Satyavan is an extraordinary being. You have seen this entire description, I don't have to repeat. But as he says in one single line, heaven's greatness came but was too great to stay. So he gives truth absolutely clear cut, no mingling of words, because that's what Savitri's mother wanted to know, the truth, but nothing but the truth. So he gives that, and this is the line again which we said is the last line of Book 1, Canto 1. This was the day when Satyavan must die. So it has been repeated again in the first canto as well as in Book 6, Canto 1. But what's interesting is in Book 1, Canto 1, it is as if Sri Aurobindo is explaining this sentence, this day returning, Satyavan must die. So when does it return? After 365 days. And this line in Canto 1, Book 1 is 365th line. You count all the lines in Book 1, Canto 1. 365th line is this. This was the day when Satyavan must die. So it's an extraordinary connection. This day returning, and on that day, and the lines are also 365 lines. Well, you can interpret as you want, but that's a fact. So, there's a bursting of truth, a blasting of truth. If you can take it, take it. And then Of course, everyone, not everyone, the mother is perturbed. She doesn't want to give her approval. She says, "My daughter, go again and find some other human being who can be your life partner for a longer time." It's but natural. Which mother would like her daughter to become a widow within 1 year? So the arguments that we have from this Queen Mother are representative of every mother on this earth who doesn't want her daughter to be a widow. Whereas Ashwapati, the father, he does not represent every father. He is a father, but all of you know the story. He is a father who has brought down Savitri by his tapasya. So he knows who Savitri is. So he has no questions asked. He says, "No, my dear daughter, whatever you have decided." But the mother is telling, "No, you go back and find someone else." So mother says, "But I reject the grace and the mockery. Mounting thy car, go forth, O Savitri, and travel once more through the peopled lands. Choose once again and leave this fated head. Death is the gardener of this wonder tree. Love's sweetness sleeps in his pale marble hand." Whatever. So the mother says, "Go back." But look at Savitri's answer there. Just down the line, down the page, you'll see. Her voice, but Savitri answered from her violent heart. Her voice was calm. Her face was fixed like steel. "Once my heart chose, and chooses not again. The word I have spoken can never be erased. It is written in the record book of God. The truth once uttered, from the earth's air effaced, by mind forgotten, sounds immortally forever in the memory of time. Once the dice fall thrown by the hand of fate in an eternal moment of the gods, my heart has sealed its troth to Satyavan. Its signature adverse fate cannot efface. Its seal, not fate, not death, not time, dissolve. Those who shall part, who have grown one being within, death's grip can break our bodies, not our souls. If death take him, I too know how to die. Let fate do with me what she will or can. I am stronger than death and greater than my fate. My love shall outlast the world. Doom falls from me, helpless against my immortality. Fate's law may change, but not my spirit's will. Yeah, you can see extraordinary power. And these are lines when we used to read in our younger days, when the mother herself was there in the physical, and when we used to associate Savitri with the mother. So imagine what impact it has had on our minds and hearts. I mean, the mother then we took her words like this. The word I have spoken can never be erased. It is written in the record book of God. And then all that is said here, let fate do with me what she will or can. I am stronger than death and greater than my fate. And then she says, the truth once uttered, from the earth's air effaced, by mind forgotten. But what happens? But sounds immortally forever in the memory of time. So this is not just Savitri, this was the mother herself. So that's why every letter that came to us, every passage that came to us, every message that came to us, every guidance that came to us, we still know that her word, her verdict, her advice cannot go waste. It is written and sounds immortally forever in the memory of time. So we never question what she said. We may not be able to follow it effectually. The tragedy is ours that we are not able to fulfill her word. But we don't doubt her word, saying she may be wrong, she may not be wrong, she may be old, she may be new, There's no may that comes in. Because you see this sentence, the truth once uttered, from the earth's air effaced, by mind forgotten, all these things can happen. But it will sound immortally forever in the memory of time. What I'm telling you is a personal experience, because whenever we read Sri Aurobindo or Savitri, the Ashwapati is none but Sri Aurobindo and Savitri is none but the mother. Of course, philosophically, the mother is greater than Savitri, we know that. But Savitri herself being an incarnation of the Supreme Mother, we used to always associate with the mother. So this was the answer that we see that Savitri says, and these are very oft-quoted words, once my heart chose and chooses not again. So tremendous firmness, nobody can now go against her, and the decision is made. And so the mother is not happy, but she cannot help it. This is the decision that we see. And the last line, the last para of the same canto, I would like to read out, because this is going to connect us to the book 1, canto 1. I am doing all that only to connect you. The line is, but Savitri replied with steadfast eyes. This is after the mother tries to persuade her to find another person. So once again, the finale as if, but Savitri replied with steadfast eyes, my will is part of the eternal will. My fate is what my spirit's strength can make. My fate is what my spirit's strength can bear. My strength is not the Titan's, it is God's. I have discovered my glad reality beyond my body in another's being. I have found the deep, unchanging soul of love. Then how shall I desire a lonely good? Or slay, aspiring to white vacant peace, the endless hope that made my soul spring forth out of its infinite solitude and sleep? My spirit has glimpsed the glory for which it came, beating of one vast heart in the flame of things. My eternity clasped by his eternity, and tireless of the sweet abysms of time, deep possibility always to love. This is first, last joy, and to its throb the riches of 1,000 fortunate years are a poverty. What a fabulous resolution. She says, 1,000 fortunate years are a poverty compared to that 1 year of my bliss with him. She doesn't want anything else. Nothing to me are death and grief, or ordinary lives and happy days. And what to me are common souls of men, or eyes and lips that are not Satyavans? I have no need to draw back from his arms and the discovered paradise of his love, and journey into a still infinity. Only now for my soul in Satyavan I treasure the rich occasion of my birth. In sunlight and a dream of emerald ways, I shall walk with him like gods in paradise. If for a year, that year is all my life. And yet I know this is not all my fate, only to live and love a while and die. For I know now why my spirit came on earth, and who I am, and who he is I love. I have looked at him from my immortal self. I have seen God smile at me in Satyavan. I have seen the eternal in a human face. Then none could answer to her words. Silent they sat and looked into the eyes of fate. So you get here the true inner relation of Savitri and Satyavan. Not only are they lovers, not only does she want to marry him, but now through that she has discovered her universal mission. Is not that she is looking for a husband. She is not worried about the death of Satyavan. It is the worry of the death of death itself. It is a universal issue. It is a sempiternal issue. So Satyavan's death is only the outermost physical symbol of an issue that she has to deal with. But what Sri Aurobindo does, remarkably as a beautiful poet, and as we say, a seer poet, is that before he takes us into the backdrop of the universal Savitri and Satyavan, he brings out the emotional relation between a husband and a wife, between Savitri and Satyavan. You see, in this canto now, in the next canto, you will see passages so passionately in love, which describe the passionate love between man and woman, between Savitri and Satyavan. You may say, why is Sri Aurobindo bringing all this so-called human physical love and passion of the physical? But unless and until he gives us the human touch, if he takes us directly to the universal Savitri, we may lose the contact. It may become irrelevant, it may become something alien and say, oh, that's fine, Savitri is universal, we have nothing to do with Savitri and Satyavan. So, in order to guide us from the human to the divine, he introduces this canto. Because I have given it much thought and I read it a couple of times to say, what is the relevance of this chapter? Grief, many people have grief. Many people's husband or wife dies after 1 year. So what is the relevance here? Then I found it is not the question of the relevance of the foreknowledge, as you would say here. foreknowledge of death. But the relevance is, as the mother used to give us always, most of the people, when we went to her, we used to get a red rose from her, which meant human love turned to the divine. So always they turn the human love to the divine. They will not say directly love the divine. Because Sri Aurobindo always maintained, unless and until you know what is human love, you will not know what is divine love. Because the very fact that your heart can melt for the other person, very fact that your heart can experience the fact and the emotion of surrender to the other person, how will you do that to the divine? Who asks your absolute surrender, your complete surrender, your constant surrender? So he is bringing this experience on the level of the physical, of the emotional, of the mental, the psychological, the dependence. So the pathos between Savitri and Satyavan is brought out so wonderfully, only to show us how much Savitri loved him. As a man, as a husband, as a person, as a human being. And then we as readers, we can emotionally identify ourselves. Once we have this identification and this sympathy, then immediately he will take us to the next level. So it is a very beautiful psychological canto that has been purposely established as a prelude to Savitri's journey. Because there is another thing that we learn from here is that this foreknowledge of death, the heart's grief, is so intense. But what is the solution to all our grief, to all our problems, to all our foreknowledge, to all our emotional, psychological problems? Some get into depression, the others go to the extreme of bipolar relations, some go to the extreme of suicide, some they say we can't manage, they think changing partners would change my life, it might change my happiness, bring me. But then we see here that in the depths of your grief, in the depths of your problems, there's only one way out. The only way out is the inner realization. Because you see, up until this canto, we do not see Savitri. Of course, we have had external descriptions and outer description by others of who Savitri is. But we have not heard Savitri, we have not touched Savitri, we have not talked to her yet. We have not felt her directly. It is Ashwapati who says about Savitri, or Narad who says about Savitri, the great person, etc., etc. So this canto is extraordinarily humane. So this is one of those beautiful passages where you can identify. So that is the beauty of this canto. So I don't know, we don't have much time, but I'll take you through some of the passages and then let us see what we can take up next. But this is the backdrop I wanted to give you, because otherwise if we read this canto by itself, you may ask the question, why? What's big about it? It's just the separation, it's just the pleasure, it's just the passion between man and woman. You may not find much meaning in that. So I took you to the whole background, that her decision was done, she chooses this person, she knows who this person is, and then she loves this person so much, she identifies herself that the whole journey of death itself becomes a journey together. You see, that's the beauty. You see, you identify with your spouse so much so that her trouble or his problems become your problems. You feel the heartbeat within you. That happens with us all over, even on the emotional human level. But here the intensity, the identity is so much deeper that when Satyavan dies, is an experience of death for herself. So we have passages where Sri Aurobindo describes that she goes through the experience of death just with the death of Satyavan. And this is exactly what happened in the life of Sri Aurobindo, the mother also. When Sri Aurobindo says, I will leave the body, mother says, I too can do that. Of course, there's a conversation which most of them must have read. And ultimately it's decided that Sri Aurobindo will leave the body and mother will stay back. It's exactly the same situation. Satyavan dies, Sri Aurobindo leaves his body, Savitri stays back, the mother stays back. And just like Savitri fought death, so does the mother. It's after the passing away of in 1950 of Sri Aurobindo that the mother's yoga of physical transformation begins. And in 1962, she undergoes the experience of death. So exactly the same parallel that we see between Savitri and Satyavan, we see between mother and Sri Aurobindo. So we see this kind of a identification is so extraordinary that I would like to bring out the relevance of this canto. So what we read last was she has decided to get married, and she has to come away to her husband's place, which is normally the custom, I think, all over the world. The wife follows and leaves her mother's place and comes to the husband's family. But I turned my page and I found a passage I want to bring to your notice. This is on page 522, the same book 6, canto 2. What I was referring to, that the mother herself undergoing the experience of death, just like Savitri is undergoing the experience of death. There is a passage here which I am sure all of you have read and remember it well. And what's really interesting about this passage, which says, a day may come when she must stand unhelped on a dangerous brink of the world's doom and hers, carrying the world's future on her lonely breast, carrying the human hope in a heart left soul, to conquer or fail on a last desperate verge. The interesting thing that I want to share with you is this is the last passage dictated by Sri Aurobindo. I mean, that's what is incredible, that he adds this passage because this is the real passage of death about what the mother experiences in 1962. So there is giving us a warning that she will pass through this experience of death, but it is a very critical thing, carrying the world's future on her lonely breast, to conquer or fail on a last desperate verge. Alone with death and close to extinction's edge, her single greatness in that last dire scene, she must cross alone a perilous bridge in time and reach an apex of world destiny where all is won or all is lost for man. In that tremendous silence, lone and lost, of a deciding hour in the world's fate, in her soul's climbing beyond mortal time, when she stands soul with death or soul with God, apart upon a silent, desperate brink, alone with herself and death and destiny, as on some verge between time and timelessness, when being must end or life rebuild its base. Alone she must conquer, or alone must fall. This was the prophetic passage which Sri Aurobindo dictated as the last piece of Savitri. So this is what refers to the mother's own experience. Well, now coming back to the story, I've hardly started reading this in Canto 1, but I'll just read a couple of lines to connect you with what all we did in the last 1 hour. That Savitri has decided, no one can change her decision. Now the marriage takes place in the normal manner, and as is the custom, she moves over to her husband's place. Here Satyavan's place is nothing but a hut in a forest. So some of her friends come with her to leave her in a new home, and that's where the passage I begin. Canto 1, toward the end of my page, where it says, "Once more she sat behind loud hastening hoofs, a speed of armored squadrons and a voice far heard of chariots bore her from her home." Of course, you understand the word. Once more she sat behind loud hastening hoofs. The first time when she had come in her chariot, she finds Satyavan. The second time again she is in a chariot coming to the home of Satyavan. So he is giving us a description that how she comes to this forest area, and he gives a beautiful description of nature. And so I'm skipping a few lines, but I'd like to read out this passage where it says that what was the life of Savitri in Madra. Madra is her father's place. The past receded and the future neared as she came close to her husband's place. The past receded and the future neared, for now behind lay Madra's spacious halls, the white carved pillars, the cool dim alcoves, the tinged mosaic of the crystal floors, the towered pavilions, the wind-rippled pools, and gardens humming with the murmur of bees. Forgotten soon, or a pale memory, the fountains splash in the wide stone-bound pool, the thoughtful noontide's brooding solemn trance, the colonnade's dream, grey in the quiet eve, the slow moonrise gliding in front of night. Left far behind were now the faces known, the happy silken babble on laughter's lips, and the close clinging clasp of intimate hands, and adoration's light in cherished eyes offered to the one sovereign of their life. So you can see the happy silken babble on laughter's lips. These are all her friends who have come to leave her, and then they go away for the last time. They tell her a bye-bye, and we have a beautiful description of the forest, etc. And I skip all these lines, these are nature ones, and I come to the passage where the friends are really leaving her, and then they feel very sad. So we will take up, lingering some days upon the forest verge, like men who lengthen out departure's pain, unwilling to separate sorrowful clinging hands, unwilling to see for the last time a face heavy with the sorrow of a coming day, and wondering at the carelessness of fate, who breaks with idle hands her supreme works. They parted from her with pain-fraught, burdened hearts, as forced by inescapable fate we part from one whom we shall never see again. Driven by the singularity of her fate, helpless against the choice of Savitri's heart, they left her to her rapture and her doom. In the tremendous forest savage charge, all put behind her that was once her life, all welcomed that henceforth was his and hers. She abode with Satyavan in the wild woods. Priceless, she deemed her joy so close to death. Apart with love, she lived for love alone. As if self-poised above the march of days, her immobile spirit watched the haste of time, a statue of passion and invincible force, an absolutism of sweet imperious will, a tranquility and a violence of the gods, indomitable and immutable. Well, that was the first section of this canto, where we see the physical separation. She comes away from her father's palace, she comes to the forest, to Satyavan. Her friends leave her there. Now the whole past of the palace is only a memory for her. I mean, Sri Aurobindo is slowly guiding us into the chamber of grief which is in her heart. So first is the physical separation from her friends, which is again in itself a kind of a sad experience, that you are leaving your parents' house, your palace and all that. But now we will see slowly her psychological pain. But a psychological pain which she alone knows. Foreknowledge means she alone knows that Satyavan is going to die. So it's like that, when you know the person is going to die in the next 12 months, in the counted days, your passion, your wanting to grip, your wanting to grab, becomes much more intense. So that is the intensity we see here of her human love, which knows every minute passing by, he will be taken away. So her passion increases, at the same time her grief increases. So it's a very beautiful psychological situation of love and grief together in the bosom of Savitri. We will take it up from there in our next class, but I hope you got a good background of the relevance of this Canto 1, because after this Canto 1 we are taken into depth, the parable of the search for the soul and the soul, etc. There the real yoga begins. But this is only as a preparation to us to say that why did Savitri go within? Because she wanted to solve the problem of Satyavan's death. So the outer deaths, outer sorrows, outer griefs can be not only counterbalanced but conquered only by the inner realization. So that's what we get. Yeah, we'll have concentration.